Good morning, Mets fans, and welcome to a Monday edition of Driving with Mr. Met. I am Mr. Met, and unfortunately had to break out the brooms yesterday. Yes, the Mets were swept by the Braves. I want to talk about the series. I want to talk about the offense disappearing. I want to talk about the fantastic pitching for the most part. And I'm going to do that on today's show in just a moment. First day of school today for those of you who have young kids. My kid started this morning, and my daughter had her first fall ball doubleheader yesterday. So while I was watching softball, I was watching Matz pitch beautifully simultaneously. I was able to keep my eye on the action on both fronts. And unfortunately, the Mets were swept, as I said yesterday. 3 games taken from the Braves, who honestly are kryptonite to the Mets. And the other thing is that they're not that much better a team than the Mets are, at least on paper. But on the field, man, the Mets just cannot seem to get it done against the Braves. They are constantly, they look, I don't want, the word afraid is not right. Maybe the word timid is right. They look like they're ready for something to go wrong. And look, clearly the baseball gods have something in store for Atlanta, because look, the Braves bring in Adeiny Hechavarria, who, if you'll all recall, despite Matty Holt's constant claims that Hechavarria was a good player and deserved the $1 million that he was owed, he wasn't, and he didn't, and the Mets made the smart business decision to let him go. He was batting like 160 as a Met. And of course, the Braves pick him up, and he becomes an integral part of defeating the Mets over these 3 games. Francisco Cervelli is picked up off the scrap heap. He was DFA'd by the Pirates, released by the Pirates after spending the majority of the season on the injured list due to what else? Concussions. Cervelli has always been a good player. I've always really been annoyed by him. He just always annoyed the shit out of me. Back from when he was a Yankee till his time as a Pirate, but it was good. I didn't have to see him that often when he was in Pittsburgh. Now that I have to see him in Atlanta, I remembered why I dislike him so much. And what does he do? Goes 3 for 5 with 3 RBIs after not playing a game in the majors for what, like 4 months. So clearly there's something in the air for the Braves. Now look, we could say our same piece of good fortune there. Look, the Mets went out and picked up Joe Panik after he was let go by the Giants, and Panik's been good for the Mets. So, I guess the shoe drops on both feet, or whatever you want to say there. It's not just exclusively a Braves thing, but you've got to imagine that if the Mets went out and signed Josh Donaldson to a 1-year, $24 million contract, we'd be talking about him as the corpse of Jed Lowry at this point. It just seems to be the Mets' luck. But I don't want to get down on things, because here's the way I look at this series. This was a series that if the Mets put forth a little bit of offense, they take 2 out of 3 from the Braves. If the Mets don't squander scoring opportunities, they take 2 out of 3 from the Braves. Yesterday's game was weird because there was just very little offense on either side. Matz pitched brilliantly yesterday. 6 innings, 2 hits, 1 run on a home run by that dirtbag Josh Donaldson, who is climbing the ladder as one of my most hated players in all of baseball. I think, honestly, I was thinking more about it. My hatred of Donaldson goes back to when I drafted him in fantasy baseball when he was still with the Blue Jays, and I think it was maybe 2016 or 2017, and he spent basically like 80% of the season on the injured, on the DL at the time. I think I've hated him since then, and now that I have to see him and his mullet and his awful face, I just despise him. And every time he steps up to the plate, I want to see him get hit by a pitch. I know that's terrible, but it's how I feel. So you can't tell me how to feel. Anyway, Donaldson hits this ridiculous pop-up home run yesterday that somehow got out of the park. And what was interesting about it is I saw a tweet, and I think it was actually SNY or Mets Booth that tweeted this. The launch angle, the distance traveled, the speed off the bat on these 2 hits were identical. Donaldson's home run and J.D. Davis's fly out to left field. I don't know how that's possible. I mean, certainly it has got to do with trajectory and angle and whatnot, but still, it's just that was such a Mets thing to happen. Davis's home run last week, that ball he hits is a home run last week, no question about it. But you bring the Braves in, and everything goes against us. It just feels that way, doesn't it? So, as I said, I'm looking at this series trying to put a positive spin on it. And look, deGrom on Friday night was unbelievable. I mean, Jake was so good on Friday. Set a major league record, something that hasn't happened in the modern era. He became the first pitcher in the modern era of baseball to record 13 or more strikeouts in the game and hit a home run in the same game twice in the same season. deGrom has been fantastic. This Braves lineup is really good. And both deGrom and Matz deserve a lot of credit for keeping them off the board. And that's the positive that I'm trying to put on this. Even the bullpen, the Mets bullpen Friday night, pitched really well. To give up 2 runs against a really, really good team like the Braves, that's something. And yes, it's a loss, but you have to take some consolation in the fact that none of these games were blowouts. I guess you could argue maybe Saturday's was a little bit lopsided, but, Saturday, it's funny. Saturday, the Mets score 5 runs, and they weren't enough. Friday and Sunday, the Mets can't score shit, and if they'd split those 5 runs, they could have taken 2 of those games. So it's the way it goes. Whatever. It just sucks that the Mets have to drop these 3 to the Braves, but it's not the end of the world. It's not the end of the world at all. The Mets start a series, not today, but tomorrow with the Chicago Cubs. And this is a good recipe for the Mets to turn the page on the Braves and get back to their winning ways. Because let's not forget, the Mets just came off a sweep of the Cleveland Indians, a really good team who the Mets swept. The Mets have the ability to do the same thing with the Cubs because the Cubs do not play well on the road. They're coming into Citi Field, where the Mets do play well. The Mets are chasing the Cubs. The Cubs have the second wild card. The Mets can eclipse them with a series sweep. So that's what the Mets have to be looking for here against Chicago. I do think it's doable. I do think this team can turn the page on what happened over the weekend. I do think this team can look at some of the positives from the weekend. And I do think they can take this series from the Cubs. There are a couple of red flags that need to be thrown up. The first one is Todd Frazier. And this is sort of related to the second one. Todd Frazier's at-bats have been poor, to say the least. And you could always point to his defense as being, he plays a good third base. And that's generally true, but of late he has not. And with Jeff McNeil coming back, I really want to see Todd Frazier be on the bench as a potential power bat to come up in a run-scoring situation. And that needs to happen starting tomorrow. I think McNeil needs to be at third, Panic at second, and Davis in left field, Todd Frazier on the bench. So that's red flag number 1. Red flag number 2 is Mkckey Callaway, who has really made some poor decisions over the last couple of days. And I keep calling it over-managing. So yesterday, I probably would have stuck with Matz yesterday. Yes, he was at 102 pitches. Yes, he had thrown 6 innings. But for the second time in a row against a really good lineup, Steven Matz completely had the Braves off balance. Even the 1 run that he allowed, as I said, was a pop-up that somehow got out. I would have stuck with Matz in the 7th inning yesterday. I don't know that the outcome would have been any different. But we saw what happened with Sewald, right? Sewald comes in, and Paul Sewald's been good since returning to the Mets, but he comes in, first batter he faces is Donaldson, home run. It's like, okay, it's Mets, right? And it's Mkckey over-managing, in my opinion. The previous game, Saturday night, this one drove me crazy. 7th inning. Mets have Jeff McNeil on leading off the inning as a pinch hitter. First at bat off the injured list. What does he do? He gets a double. Because of course he does. That's what McNeil does. Double to right center. Showing no ill signs of a leg injury at all. He legs it out, gets to second base. Ahmed Rosario is the next batter. Jeff McNeil has perfectly adequate speed to be able to score on a base hit from second base. Now, at this point, it's a tie ball game, 5-5. It's not the 9th inning. It's the 7th inning. I repeat, it's the 7th inning. Ahmed Rosario, one of the hotter hitters on the Mets. Naturally, what do you have him do? You have him bunt. And you have him get behind in the count, 0-2. And that's a call that Mkckey shouldn't have made. You could also argue, and I would have to agree, that a guy with Rosario's speed should be able to bunt. I mean, it baffles me that someone like that can't bunt. But that notwithstanding, whether he can or can't, it's the wrong call to make in the 7th inning. What ended up happening was a travesty. So nobody out. Jeff McNeil tries to advance on a ground ball from Rosario to shortstop, fielded cleanly by Echeverria, who makes a nice throw to third base to gun McNeil down there. McNeil should not have been going. That was a mistake on his part. Very next batter, Joe Panik, set up for hit and run. Rosario runs, Panik misses. Rosario's thrown out by like a step and a half at second base on an unbelievable throw by who else but Francisco Cervelli. So it's just, that inning was awful. That decision by Mickey Callaway was awful, and it wasn't his last one. Yesterday in I think it was the 7th inning, the Mets had a scoring opportunity. One of the few scoring opportunities they had on the day. Rene Rivera was making his major league debut for 2019 yesterday, after coming up to replace Tomas Nido, who was placed on the injured list after he got smashed in the head by that asshole Josh Donaldson. I think he did it on purpose. But Rivera, anyhow, is the batter. Again, it's a scoring opportunity late in the game, and you have Wilson Ramos on deck to pinch hit. I repeat, you have Wilson Ramos on deck to pinch hit. Not to pinch hit for a guy who's had 2 at-bats all season, who admittedly has had a nice season at AAA, but Wilson Ramos doesn't get the opportunity to come up with a runner in scoring position. Ends up coming up in the 9th inning, where, of course, he extends his hitting streak to 19 games now. But still, it was just a couple of really poor Mickey Callaway decisions this weekend. And Mkckey has to get back to laying low in the dugout and not over-managing, because his over-managing moves really glare to me. You can so see it when he's over-managing. And I'm not talking about after something shitty happens. I'm talking about before anything bad happens. I'm talking about the move itself. And you know it's really bad when Gary Cohen questions it on the air. And Gary Cohen questions Mickey Callaway on the air a lot. And that can't happen. Manager is best to be hidden, quiet, unheard from. You don't want to stand out like a sore thumb. The manager can help the team lose. Very, very hard for the manager to help the team to win. And that's the bottom line. So anyhow, I didn't want to end today on a bummer note, but it is what it is. Mickey Callaway's got to be better. And in this Cubs series, he cannot afford to go tinkering like Joe Madden would tinker. Let's let our opponent do the tinkering, and let's leave this game even keel. Let's not make any rash decisions. Let's not overmanage. That's my message for Mickey Callaway, in case he listens to this sometime. So that'll wrap it up for today's show. Thanks for watching. I appreciate it. You can follow me on Twitter at Mr_Met. And I might be back tomorrow. I don't know. We'll see. Regardless, I'll be back at some point this week, if not tomorrow, certainly on Wednesday, to talk about the first game of the Cubbies series. Until then, have a great day, and as always, let's go Mets.